My loves, it's Krishma War here. I am jumping on today to talk about separation anxiety training for dogs, especially this topic, which is something I get questions about every single day, which is how much should we push our dogs when we're doing separation anxiety training? So how much should we push them in our sessions when we're working on exposing them to being alone? And I'm going to be joined today by Malena DeMartini Price, who is one of my mentors and the mother of separation anxiety training. She literally wrote the book. So Google separation anxiety training for dogs, and you will likely see Malena's name and her amazing book. And I was part of her program for dog trainers to be trained to become certified in treating separation anxiety. And it means that I get like a title called CSAT, and it's honestly been the single best program that I've ever taken as a dog trainer to learn about continued education for dogs with behavior challenges. So let me see if I can find Malena and invite her up to join us today, and then we'll talk training and how we get them from being unable to be left alone to being able to be left alone for hours at a time. Malena, hello, welcome.
Hello, Karishma. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Always thrilled when I have Mama Malena to come and join us, and that's why I call you in my head and out loud, apparently. And I was just telling everybody a little bit about how I took your CSAT program a few years ago, how it changed pretty much everything about how I work with dogs. And I was giving you a little intro, but I might actually just pass over to you for a proper intro so that you can maybe tell anyone who hasn't met you yet. I'm sure there are not that many folks, but let them maybe know a little bit about what you're doing right now and things that are going on, and then we'll dive into the topic about pushing dogs in separation anxiety training. So I'll pass it over to you, my love.
Okay. Well, just a quick little wrap up about me. I have been working with separation related behavior problems for over 20 years now, 24 actually to be exact. And I back many years ago, over 10 years ago, after practicing for 10 years, I started our program for skilled dog professionals that want to learn about separation anxiety and how to effectively work with clients that are struggling with this issue. And so things have been amazing with a number of CSATs like yourself, certified separation anxiety trainers, that it sort of exploded in the sense that people are now getting the kind of quality care that they really need for these complex behavior issues. Mm-hmm. I also want to say there's so much information out there right now, and I'm going to put a little plug in because I'm going to be the keynote speaker at the very first, the keynote closing speaker at the very first Separation Anxiety Online Conference, which comes up in May, on May 3rd. It's a one-day online conference, and I would love to see people there.
Yay! So if you guys are listening today and you're interested in learning more, deep diving into this, I will be there listening to everything. I'm so excited for this, like, first ever, I think, separation specific conference, right? It's like very fun for us nerdy CSATs. We're very, very excited about that. And we were talking earlier about what we should talk about today. We had a few different ideas, and immediately, I think when we were talking about pushing dogs with separation anxiety training, we were both like, ooh, this one is, I think, topical. There's a lot of conversations around this topic, and I get questions from professionals and guardians about this. So I think we kind of want to start off with what we even mean by pushing dogs in separation anxiety training. And I'll hand that over to you because you truly are the master of explaining these concepts. So go ahead, my love.
You're so funny. Well, first of all, thinking of pushing dogs too hard, too fast is something that pushes my buttons. Pun intended. But I just have to say that it is very common that we are looking at dogs that suffer with this issue in respect to, or with respect to, how long can they be alone? And we're so typically focused on duration and increasing that duration that oftentimes we are overlooking the fact that we need to go at the pace that the dog sets, not the pace that we are choosing for our dog. And so pushing in general has a lot of risks with it. And what we're talking about when we're talking about pushing dogs is every dog, while they are each unique individuals, has a particular point or a particular area is during alone time that causes them distress. Sometimes they sort of escalate up to that point. Sometimes it's immediate. But when we're talking about that arena of when the dog is showing signs of distress, we should never, and there's not very many always and never in dog training, but we should never consider pushing past that point of stress, anxiety, and fear, because the risks that carries are really significant. In particular, we get told all the time, oh, well, people sensitize dogs for separation anxiety. Well, this is one way to do it, is to keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I'm often the third or fourth or fifth trainer that people come to. That's kind of quite seems to be the case, especially when your prices are pretty, like if you're like pricing yourself high, people won't often go with you first. They'll try other things first sometimes and then end up turning up at my door. And I see so frequently, I was talking with about a case with you earlier, a dog who'd been doing an app, which what those sessions looked like were they're meant to be desensitization sessions to slowly expose the dog to being left alone and build comfort. But what they actually looked like was Guardian stands up, the dog immediately jumps up and is at her heels. Guardian walks to the door, dog is panting a little bit, their heart is beating fast, they're right at their heels. Maybe the Guardian would close the door behind them for up to 5-10 seconds, where the dog would be worrying, checking, they're activated, and sometimes even a little bit of whining. And then the Guardian would come back and the dog would follow them back to the sofa. And it kind of looked like that over and over again. And they kept pushing, raising the difficulty levels. And in their head, they were saying, well, the dog used to bark the minute I walked towards the door. And now the dog's not barking, so that's better, right? And I think it's hard for people sometimes when I go, so that's an example of pushing, because we were pushing the criteria, we're pushing and making it harder for the dog without achieving what I would consider kind of passing body language. Passing body language is like a phrase we use at CCA because we grade sessions, and this particular Guardian was getting C's in their session because the dog's behavior was within the C category, which to me was potentially actually making things worse, because this dog was having the experience of Guardian leaves, I stress and worry, Guardian comes back. Guardian leaves, I stress and worry, Guardian comes back. That's how we would teach a dog to whine at the door, right? That's literally how we would do that.
Correct. And I would go even a step further to say, whether you're a professional or you're a guardian, this word will probably make sense. When we continue to push a dog into that, area where they're showing signs of distress, and over and over and over, that's what we call flooding. And, that hurts my heart to think about pushing a dog into a scenario where over and over and over again, they're reaching a point of stress and fear. And, we're really knowledgeable in some other aspects of fear, right? So if you had particularly like a puppy, and you decided you wanted to clip his nails, and he didn't agree that was going to be a very fun to do, and then you just pushed and you just let him wiggle and scream while you were clipping them, that is absolutely going to exacerbate that fear for the next time. And separation anxiety really isn't any different, right? If we push them to the wiggly, squirmy, whiny, I'm afraid moment, then we're not going to be able to make progress.
Yes. I think the thing that's really hard for people to see is when you have a dog, because we work with often really quite challenging dogs who have separation anxiety and then other behavior challenges as well, right? So if we have a dog who is jumping up and barking when the Guardian stands up, when the guardian touches a shoe, I think that lots of guardians look at me like I'm insane when I say, we are going to get you to the point where you can put your shoes on and leave the house and your dog will not get up. They go, what? No way. And I'm like, well, that's actually what your dog looks like when they're calm and relaxed, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that is my criteria. And I will not be raising the duration to 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute, until I have an A grade, A star grade in that first kind of that first part of the departure. So we have a system, because we are, the biggest challenge we saw with guardians was this pushiness, and so we developed a whole system at CCO to help guardians set criteria better, where we like split the departures into 4 steps, and then we have grades for each of those steps that they have to achieve before they can move on to the next step. There are a few CSATs and folks who have done similar things in different areas, and it's really helpful for folks, but people don't believe me at the beginning, and I've had people say this is impossible, and it is impossible if they keep practicing this other thing systematically every 5 days a week. It's going to be really hard. And this particular client who was working with the app, I ended up being like, this is going to take us even longer now because you've rehearsed this all wrong. And so we have to undo that. And then we have to do our separation anxiety training after that point. And so it can feel impossible to folks, but it's absolutely possible. And I wonder, like, what might it look like if we weren't doing that pushiness, if it wasn't that kind of, we're pushing them to a stressy point and they're just hanging in there, what might the alternative be?
Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned, you'll tell clients like, we're going to get to the point where you step out or get up to go to the door or walk out the door, what have you, where your dog doesn't bother even getting up. And I want to make a mention sort of with that point, with those early stages. First of all, we're not teaching the dog to stay on their bed, right? So this, and if you were to teach the dog to stay on the bed while you stepped out for 5 seconds and came back, you wouldn't be making progress with separation anxiety, just bottom line. And the reality is the dogs will start to not react to the process of leaving, whether that's just getting to the door or opening the door one small little inch, because there's repetition of tiny exposures, tiny exposures that in each exposure is allowing the dog to go, nothing yucky happened there. When my guardian walks to the door and cracks that door open 1 inch, it is safe. And safety is so unbelievably important in these protocols. And we need to uphold that for our dogs if we want them to learn. Not only if we want them to learn, but if we want them to learn in an efficient direction.
And I always think, like, if we're struggling to get our dogs from, say our dogs start at a level 10 of stress when you're even walking towards the door, say we get them from 10 to 5, getting them from 5 to 2, from 5 to 1, that is the true, like the really excellent like sub-threshold desensitization work. That's where the magic happens. And some training sessions can look different sometimes for some of these more complicated dogs. So this dog that I was talking about, who would like jump up the minute they even stood up, this dog generally was a very unsettled dog. They struggled with rest, they struggled with noises, they struggled with hyperactivity and connection and attention seeking behaviors. So to get to the point where this dog was able to be really fully calm, to get those high grades, we had to build a foundation of just base regulation. Base regulation comes first. So if you're struggling to get those really great grades, if I call them, or those high level like the emotions are part of the criteria, and if you achieve that, to achieve that in some hard cases, you need to actually go back to the foundations and set some foundations with skill building, with making sure this dog gets enough exercise, with, little like other things like that. It does not mean that we need to then just push this dog because we can't achieve it. It always means that we are missing something in the foundations and at the base level. And I guess we didn't talk about this in our prep, but like, I guess this leads into this importance of having a holistic framework, a holistic wellness practice that is not just about, we see separation anxiety, or we treat that with desensitization, you also have to look at all the other areas of this animal's life. You have to, and that's something you taught us so well, is this all interconnects. And so my question for folks is, if you're struggling to get these high criteria sessions, what else is missing in the plan? Where do we go back to the beginning? What are we missing in those earlier stages?
Absolutely. And it is so common, as you mentioned, that these dogs are struggling with other aspects in their behavior. So even not just what is missing for that dog, but this is going to sound ridiculous, but what can be missing. In other words, can we reduce noises? Can we increase exercise so that we're not on edge all the time? Can we both increase and decrease those aspects of that dog's life that need attention before they're ever going to be able to be comfortable with, oh, sure, walk out for 20 seconds. No.
Absolutely. I always use this analogy. I'm a big nerd. I'm a big Star Trek nerd and sci-fi nerd. And I always say that I think of dog behavior, it's like the switchboard of a spaceship, and there are 100 different lights, and there's the engine, and then there's the fuel tank, and then there's all the different bits. And if I'm finding that a dog is struggling to achieve the level of relaxation and calmness and all the things that I want in my sessions, I look to the switchboard and I go, okay, what's going on? Have you had off-leash decompression this week? What's your medical status? Are your needs for being chewing and all these things being met? And I look into all these different areas. And I think sometimes I see people thinking that they don't have any other tools available. So they go, I guess we should be pushing them. We should push the criteria up. And I just want to empower people to say, behavior is impacted by so many different things. If something is not working here, I might look elsewhere in the ship and the way the ship is working to see what I can do. And when you think like that, and when you have a holistic framework, it opens up so many more ways that you can maneuver. And if you're training with separation anxiety, you're working with trainers who aren't having this approach, that's something to question, because they're not using the full toolkit that they have available to them. And that's when we'll run into problems, I think, from my experience.
And it's interesting when you talk about, training with a professional, well, or even, if you're a guardian and you're moving along in training on your own with, some support materials, truly, we have to remember, this is a privilege that we have to be able to help our dogs holistically, as you mentioned, right? We sometimes feel like, oh, my dog and his behavior issue. And no, he's just, needing some of your love, guidance, and support, and having the privilege to be able to say, I can help you feel safe. I mean, it's really an honor to be able to go in those incremental steps where you are supporting that dog's calmness, health, well-being, and all of the aspects that make a dog feel and be the best that they can be.
I think also I truly believe that helping these dogs through these behavior challenges can heal humans. I've seen it happen. I've seen it, I've experienced it myself. So I have all these different lenses through which I see this, and I'm like, yes, that's 100% true. I also see those people who are this is really hard and this sucks. Absolutely. And the most important thing for me is that we need to not push if we want to see success, regardless of all of the kind of spiritual, ethical debates. We have all these different lenses we can look at through, and I agree with all of that. But practically speaking, it is not going to be effective if we continue the pattern of pushing the dog into itchiness and tetchiness and then coming back. And I've actually seen dogs become sensitized and trained to kind of bark and whine and worry.
Oh, yes.
For the humans to then come back. And so it feels like we need to push or we won't get anything done. And that urgency, that sense of we need to push through things, it's just something that I think in general, as a culture, as a race, as a species, we all need to just think about whether that actually serves us or if it's just something that's normalized to us. And I found that you said to me before, go slow to go fast.
That's right.
And I was with this particular case that we've been talking about, where they spent weeks and months working on this app that was doing the wrong thing, and they were continuing to push, and it was almost like they were digging a hole even deeper that they were going to have to get out of, and it made me frustrated for them. And also I just wanted to go, like, if we actually slowed down here, you don't believe it now, but if we actually went so slow at the beginning that it feels like you're not going anywhere, you have to believe me when I say that graph picks up over time.
Oh, absolutely.
It really does pick up over time. And so I was saying to this client who was struggling to get on board with the slowness of the protocol, they were saying, how can we go this slow forever? And I was saying, no, that's not what's going to happen. We're going to go very slowly at the beginning, to the point that you're going to be like, this is painful. And then a few months in, you're going to suddenly jump up. You're going to suddenly jump from minutes to hours. This is what we see happening all the time, but only if you set that foundation that is so solid. And it reminded me of when I was recovering from an injury. Like, I had a really chronic shoulder and back injury, and all the PTs that I went to injured me. Every single one. And made me worse and worse and worse, until I found someone who specialized in like really challenging injury recovery.
Yes.
And the exercises that they were giving me, I was embarrassed because they were so easy. And I was like, I was like, I'm in my 20s and I feel like I'm like 80 years old. This can't be right. But guess what? It was that comically, painfully easy stuff that I had to repeat and master for months before they even let me pick up anything heavier. And there are loads of people who would have done just like lots of people do and go, screw this, I'm going to push and go to the gym and do something fun. And I would have ended up back in bed, bedbound, back unable to lift things. And so it just reminds me of that so clearly. It's such a great example of the body. Like, biology tells us how change takes place organically, and it's never this kind of mad push through discomfort and through this kind of through this conflict.
Yeah. That's a perfect example of, what unfortunately we do see happen, whether like the example with the app, or, someone not understanding that pushing is going to cause potential regression or harm to the process. And it reminds me about just thinking about you seeing that sort of rehabilitation specialist and realizing how, working with a professional, you want them to be not only compassionate and use, humane methodologies, but humane, compassionate methodologies are effective. And what's so important about that, if you're not effective, you are not upholding the values that most of us have, in that we want to be compassionate, humane, gentle with our animals. And so, it's really, effectiveness is part of being a skilled dog person. It really is. And, I used to, years ago, when I first started my practice, I remember seeing folks that were just, and not just even separation related, but just folks that were sloppy trainers, and particularly 20 plus years ago, there was a lot of just hang your shingle up and call yourself a trainer. And that sloppiness is exactly that ineffectiveness, which really does not uphold the values that we all find so important, which are gentle, humane, compassionate support for our animals.
Yeah, I have to absolutely agree with you there and say, like, in this industry, the minimum we need to strive for is effective. Like, it needs to work. It needs to work. Otherwise, what's the point? And that's why I think your program was so transformational for me, because you provided me with a way of tracking data and analyzing cases over time. And I have hundreds of case studies carefully documented, as you met hundreds of the CSATs. I also have mistakes carefully documented that I can see where I went wrong. And what that allows me to do is, if I ever am unsuccessful or not as successful as I want to be, I can go back and I can make sure that I figure out what it is that I missed. And when in doing that, what I learn is that it's never that I should have pushed. I always missed something in the foundations, always. I missed something at the beginning on the switchboard. And so part of being effective, I think, and what you've really helped me achieve is reviewing what we've done, reviewing that data and making a practice of looking back over your data, whether you're a guardian or a trainer.
That's right.
You need to study what you do. The amount of time I spend watching videos of myself training dogs and looking through watching videos of me coaching clients, it's kind of sick. Like it's people will be like, there's something wrong with you, but it's how I get better and it's how I learn how to do this, literally by rehearsing and watching. So read back your data, watch your sessions, your alone time sessions back, and really critically review everything and say, what would Krishma grade this, do you think? And if you do need any help grading and learning more, obviously we have this conference that Malena mentioned, as well as working with any of the CSATs that Malena has trained around the world, and you guys know where to find me. And I just think this is so important for folks to hear, because of the amount of people that I've seen who have just suffered at the hands of this mistake, and even professionals who still kind of struggle with this idea. It's absolutely key. I guess one last question that I'm curious in before we kind of close up is, I think a lot of folks, I've heard people saying that, like, depending on how you're, like, basically in a nutshell, a lot of folks are saying that if a dog is frustrated rather than fearful, that means we should push more. In a nutshell, like, obviously there's nuance there, but if we have a dog who is experiencing what this person would class as like frustration or rage, in those cases it would be effective to push more. That's the question that I've been asked many times. From my experience, that answer is absolutely not. I could talk for hours about this, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are.
Well, first and foremost, I just have to say that question is a little challenging, in that why would we push a dog who was experiencing rage, frustration, etc., when that could potentially just grow that rage and that frustration? This is a very big emotional response. And I also feel like frustration and fear, anxiety can often go hand in hand. So I may be frustrated as a dog that my guardian is walking out the door, but 5 seconds later, I'm not just frustrated, I'm fearful, I'm anxious. Yeah. And so those two bleed together oftentimes, and just continuing to work with an animal that is experiencing that rage and frustration, as has been talked about in other arenas, in such a way that we're only pushing and pushing them. I think we commonly in our industry talk about, we don't want to push a dog just for an extinction burst, right? Is what they typically are referring to. It's like, oh, well, they'll get to the point that they're like, oh well.
Yeah. And I think there are often two different pictures in those cases. I have a client right now who's a great example of this, dog in New York, and they experience what I would call rage. When the guardian wants to leave, they are screaming, they're charging, they're biting, snapping at their heels. And sometimes if we support them through the departure, they can settle and relax.
I agree.
If they get really worked up on the way out, they can spiral and they can be distressed and really agitated for hours when left alone. And this is exactly the sort of case that I think people would say, that dog's not got panic and fear, that dog's pissed off, that dog's frustrated. So we should just treat that differently. And what I usually say to folks is, my 2 cents in this is that, like, frustrated dogs tend to really struggle with the departure. Fear phobic panic dogs tend to struggle with the alone time, with the actual being alone process. So when we have these sort of frustration and rage dogs, if we're gonna create a binary, which who loves a binary? Binaries binaries in 2025. But if we're gonna do that, it's more like a spectrum. But if we're gonna say that there's like fear and then frustration, it's not that these frustrated dogs are not able to be treated with desensitization. It's actually a really great tool for them in many cases. but you're going to have to go super slow at the beginning for those dogs. Super slow at the beginning. You might be able to go faster at the beginning for the panic dogs, but then when you get to 1 hour, 2 hours, that's when you have to really make your splits really carefully and slow things down. And so I think this idea that like desensitization doesn't work for frustration is just not true. We like know it isn't true, like theoretically, and also then in practice we've seen it over and over again. I think what is worth bringing up potentially is that like frustrated dogs who struggle with impulsivity and frustration, and dogs who struggle with fear and anxiety and overwhelm will need different holistic plans, right? So you might still use desensitization in both of those cases, but likely with the frustrated impulsive dog, like this Rosie, the dog that I'm working with, who has the charging behaviors, like we are working in all of her life on her not being an asshole.
Right.
Because she's a spicy little beast and she will yell and push and, you know, snap and bite to get her way. So we've been teaching her in all these other areas, don't do that. And if we have a dog who's super fearful and shut down and easily crumples into themselves or panics, I might be teaching them to be confident, and I might be teaching them to push through adversity. And so the difference actually comes to me in the holistic plan, and that's where people get confused. And I think that that's just it's been something we've both, I think, been thinking about recently, is this topic. And the difficulty to find nuance, I think, often is because people don't have the experience of doing like 1,000 cases like this. Like we've done 10,000 cases, and I think with those 10,000 cases you realize like these dogs are so complicated and nuanced. You know, it's like you said, the frustration and the fear and all these different emotions, they don't exist on their own. They can flick between them, and so our treatment plans need to be equally nuanced and equally with like people who really understand that nuance and that detail. Yeah,
I love that. You know, one thing I want to say, I know we are getting up on time, but I just wanted to say something that we started out talking about earlier, but that idea that the guardian is saying, but I'll never get out the door, or I'm going to have to go at this pace forever and ever and ever. And I hope that professionals and guardians alike can do a little bit of a reframe in thinking that scaling back and being especially cautious, particularly in the beginning, is actually really a strength. It is a strength. And we understand that from your example, right? You're scaling back on your rehabilitation, made it possible for you to recover. Whereas you run into the gym and deciding to lift weights at that time would have done a lot of damage. And so just that reframe of thinking, you know, pulling back is not a failure. Pulling back is a strength, and that scaling so that we're supporting our dog's health and well-being and relaxation and comfort would really be an optimal strength to lean into.
It's a great point. I love that. And I always think like the biggest, strongest trees, you don't see them grow. Like the most incredible things happen with really tiny incremental steps. That's how literally mountains are created, oceans are filled, like amazing things happen through going slow. And that reframe is so helpful. We've got some people asking some questions, especially one person asking about pharmaceutical interventions. I'm going to say that we're not going to dive into that, my loves, but if you are interested, guys, I have 2 hours of resources on anxiety medications with a behavior specialist vet available in my membership, and you can find the information there in the link in my bio. So if you want to learn more, 2 hours of resources there all about that. So dive there into that information. And for now, I think I'm going to let Malena go, because I've literally had you on here for so long, and it's been such a great conversation, and I hope everybody shares it around so that everyone can learn from you, because you really are just completely have changed the industry. I know you always get really embarrassed when I completely like gas you up publicly, but it needs to happen, because I have taken so many courses, I've done so many programs and certifications, and honestly, the CSAT program was the one that changed my work and my life the most. So I'm just very grateful. And if any trainers out there interested, go and learn from Malena. She's phenomenal, and the program is one of the, literally probably one of the best out there, I think.
You are so kind, and thank you. Thank you for those lovely words. And I agree. I hope that folks at least pop over to my website and see what the program is all about. We're always looking for really skilled professionals like you that are interested in working through the complexity and the nuance and the data and distilling everything to improve the lives of these dogs and the people who love them.
Totally. And it's not just applicable to separation anxiety.
That's
the way
right.
it taught me to train for separation anxiety impacted everything else that I work with as well, which is everything from reactivity to handling aggression to resource guarding to fear and anxiety. Really made a massive difference. And we'll hopefully see all of you guys in Malena. I'll see you in May for the conference about separation anxiety.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karishma.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Malena.
everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining. I'll see you soon. Bye everyone.